He said I was his forever. He whispered it into my hair on cold nights when I trembled with uncertainty. He looked me in the eyes and said I was everything he had ever wanted. I believed him. Every word he spoke felt like truth, like fate had finally delivered me someone who saw me, not just the surface, not just the image, but all of me. I poured myself into him, gently, completely. I shared my dreams, my fears, my heart. I built a life around his promises, trusting that the foundation we stood on was solid and shared. But I was wrong. So deeply, painfully wrong. He left me without warning, without a reason that made any sense. One day we were planning a future, and the next, he was gone. Just a silence where laughter used to live. No fight, no closure, just absence. I tried to tell myself there must be more to the story, that people do not just leave like that. But he did. And in the days that followed, as the walls of our love came crashing down around me, I realized something cruel. His promises were never real. I was his forever, until he decided I was nothing. We met on a rainy afternoon in a small coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a flower stall. I had ducked in for shelter, frustrated by the weather and the long day I had behind me. He was already sitting near the window, nursing a cup of coffee and reading a novel I happened to love. Our eyes met briefly, just a glance, but something passed between us that I could not explain. When I noticed the title of his book, I smiled. He noticed. That was how it started. A simple comment, a shared interest, and a conversation that felt far too natural for two strangers. There was an ease about him, a quiet charm that drew me in. He spoke with a calm confidence that made me feel seen, like he was truly listening, not just hearing me speak. We ended up talking for hours, the storm outside long forgotten. When I finally stood to leave, he asked if he could see me again. I remember the way he said it, not rushed, not forced, but with a sincerity that warmed me from the inside out. I said yes. What followed felt like the beginning of something rare. He texted me the next morning, not just a quick message but something thoughtful. He had looked up a quote from the book we had discussed and shared it with me, saying it reminded him of our conversation. It was small, but it meant everything. He was thoughtful in a way I had never experienced. Every date with him felt intentional. He remembered details. My favorite scent, the way I liked my tea, the story behind the ring I wore on my right hand. We talked about everything. Our pasts, our hopes, the things that scared us. He told me about losing his father when he was just a teenager, how it changed the way he saw love and permanence. I opened up about my childhood, about the walls I had built to protect myself. With him, those walls started to crumble. I felt safe. I felt chosen. He looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Not just physically, but as a person. When I laughed, he laughed. When I cried, he pulled me close and stayed quiet until I was ready to speak. There was something unspoken between us, a rhythm that felt natural, like we had been doing this forever. Our connection deepened quickly, but it never felt rushed. It felt like we were simply catching up to where we were always meant to be. We would spend hours wrapped in each other's presence, sometimes in silence, sometimes dreaming out loud about the life we could build together. He said he wanted a home filled with music, with warmth, with memories that mattered. He said he had never met anyone like me. One night, as we sat beneath a sky full of stars, he took my hand and whispered, "You are my forever." His voice trembled just enough for me to believe it was not a rehearsed line, but something real. Something he had been holding inside, waiting for the right moment to say. My heart soared. I wanted to believe it, and I did. I looked at him and saw the rest of my life. That moment sealed something between us. After that night, we began weaving our lives together more intentionally. We made room for each other's habits, each other's routines. We met each other's friends. He introduced me to his sister, and she hugged me like she had heard everything about me already. It all felt right. There were no grand fireworks, no dramatic declarations, just steady love and a growing certainty. I remember one weekend when we drove to the coast. It was unplanned, just a sudden urge to escape the city and watch the waves. We walked barefoot along the shore, our fingers intertwined, and he told me he had never felt this kind of peace before. I knew exactly what he meant. Being with him felt like coming home. I had been in love before, or at least I thought I had. But this was different. This was the kind of love that made me feel grounded and alive all at once. There was no fear in it, no guessing game. He showed up for me in small, consistent ways, bringing me soup when I was sick, texting me good night even when he was tired, remembering the little things I mentioned in passing. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was seen in all my complexity. Looking back on those early days, I see how fully I let myself fall. I let go of doubt. I stopped questioning my worth. I trusted him with the most fragile parts of me. I told myself that this time, it was safe. This time, love would not hurt. He had promised me forever, and I believed him. I believed in the life we were building together, in the future we talked about with so much hope and clarity. I fell in love with the version of forever he painted for me. And in those moments, I was certain that he had fallen just as deeply in love with mine. Moving in together felt like the natural next step. There was no grand announcement, no official date circled on the calendar. It just happened gradually. A drawer became a closet, a weekend stay turned into an entire week, and suddenly we were waking up next to each other every morning. The little things that once lived separately in our lives began to merge. I would find my favorite tea stocked in his kitchen, and he would leave his books scattered across my living room floor. When we officially signed the lease on our shared apartment, it felt like a quiet promise between us, a deeper layer of commitment that made everything feel more permanent. Our days fell into a rhythm. We would cook dinner together in the evenings, sometimes talking about our day, sometimes dancing quietly to music that played from the speaker in the corner of the room. On weekends, we would clean the apartment side by side, tease each other over how differently we folded laundry, and collapse into the couch afterward, feeling proud of the home we were shaping. We created little traditions: Sunday morning pancakes, midweek movie nights, late night walks when the city had fallen asleep. But life was not always soft and simple. There were moments of real strain. Money became tight after he lost a freelance contract, and we had to readjust everything. I picked up extra hours at work, canceled a weekend trip I had planned with my friends, and dipped into my savings so we could stay afloat. He promised it would only be temporary, that he would figure it out soon, and I believed him. I did not think twice about helping. He was my person. That was the word he always used. My person. He said it with such conviction that it made any hardship feel like something we could overcome together. There were other challenges too. His mother fell ill, and the hospital visits became frequent. He withdrew a little during that time, carrying the weight of his worry in silence. I stayed close, doing what I could, driving him to appointments, sitting with him in waiting rooms. He never asked for help, but he accepted it when I offered. And when she finally started to recover, he held my hand and said he could not have gotten through it without me. Then came the opportunity that changed everything for me, a chance to lead a new project overseas, something I had worked toward for years. I brought it up gently, uncertain of how he would take it. At first, he was supportive. He said he was proud, that I deserved it. But the more we talked about logistics and long-distance plans, the quieter he became. He never said not to go, but he started planting seeds of doubt. He asked if I was sure it was the right time, if I really wanted to be away from him for that long. His words were soft, never forceful, but I heard the hesitation behind them. In the end, I declined the offer. I told myself there would be other chances, that the timing was just not right. What I did not say aloud was that I was afraid of what might happen if I left. I had already chosen him so many times, and this was just another sacrifice for the life we were building. He kissed my forehead that night and whispered, "You are my person." It made the decision feel almost noble. Still, little things began to shift. I noticed him keeping his phone closer, turning the screen away when messages came in. He started staying out later with friends from work, sometimes forgetting to tell me where he was going. When I asked, he would smile and brush it off, saying I worried too much. He was not unkind, but he avoided difficult conversations. When something was bothering me and I tried to talk about it, he would change the subject or make a joke until the tension faded. I tried to believe it was just a phase, that stress was taking its toll on both of us. And for a while, things would settle. We would reconnect with a quiet night in, a long conversation on the balcony, a shared moment that reminded me of the beginning. He still called me his forever. He still said he loved me more than anything. I held on to those words like lifelines. Then came the milestone that made everything feel solid again. He took me to the place where we had our first real conversation, the coffee shop on that rainy day. It had been renovated, brighter now, but still held the same warmth. He led me to the table by the window, took my hand, and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring. Simple, elegant, just my style. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. He said he could not imagine a future that did not include us. I said yes through tears, believing again that we were on the right path. We celebrated with our friends that night, laughter and music filling the air, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a weight lift. I let myself dream again, imagining the life we would build as husband and wife. Whatever doubts I had, whatever small cracks I had tried to ignore, they faded into the background. He had chosen me. He had promised forever. I told myself that everything else would fall into place. I wanted to believe that love, real love, could carry us through anything. It began in the smallest of ways. At first, I told myself he was just tired. Work had picked up again, long hours and tight deadlines, and he came home later each night. He would walk through the door with his shoulders tense, barely glancing at me before heading to the shower. The man who used to greet me with kisses and jokes now barely offered a smile. I asked if everything was all right, and he would sigh, run his hands through his hair, and say he was just exhausted. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Our conversations became shorter. He started answering questions with one-word replies, often while looking at his phone. I would talk about my day, trying to keep our connection alive, but his eyes would drift, his mind elsewhere. I began to notice that he no longer reached for my hand while we watched television. His goodnight kisses turned into a quick peck or sometimes nothing at all. When I asked him if something was wrong, he would laugh gently and say, "You are overthinking things again." That phrase became a wall between us. He repeated it often, always with a calm tone that made me question myself. Was I imagining it? Was I being too sensitive? But I felt it. The space between us was growing, stretching thin and silent. He no longer asked about my dreams or worries. When I told him about a promotion I might be getting, he nodded without really listening. On my birthday, he was late to dinner. He walked in with a gift that felt rushed, something generic with a price tag still attached. He said work had run long. I smiled, said it was fine, but something inside me ached. On our anniversary, he forgot the reservation we had made. He apologized, blaming the pressure at work, and promised to make it up to me. I told him it did not matter, but the truth was it did. I was watching the man I loved fade before my eyes, and he acted as if nothing was changing. Still, I tried. I tried so hard. I made our home softer, warmer. I cooked his favorite meals, left little notes in his coat pocket reminding him I loved him. I planned quiet weekends just for us, hoping we could find our way back to each other. I reached for him even when he seemed unreachable. I told myself that relationships had seasons, and this was just a difficult one. I wanted to believe that he was still the man who once called me his forever. But the more I reached, the further he seemed to drift. He started taking work calls in another room, locking his phone when he never used to. He changed his passwords and said it was for security. I felt uneasy, but he dismissed my concerns with a tired smile and the same old words, "You are overthinking." And so I silenced the voice inside me that whispered something was wrong. I did not want to seem insecure. I wanted to be the woman who trusted her partner. I reminded myself of all the good memories, of the promises he had made, of the ring on my finger. Then one day, I found him sitting on the balcony, staring out at the street below with a distant look on his face. I sat beside him, reached for his hand. He let me hold it, but it felt limp in mine. I asked him what he was thinking, and he said nothing. Just tired. Always tired. I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder, and wondered when he had started feeling so far away even while sitting right next to me. I decided to do something big, something that might bring us back together. I booked a weekend trip for just the two of us, to a cabin in the mountains where we had once gone early in our relationship. I remembered how happy we had been there, how we had laughed and talked for hours without distractions. I planned every detail carefully, packed our bags, arranged time off work. I surprised him with the news, expecting a smile, a kiss, some flicker of excitement. He stared at me, silent for a moment, and then said, "That is sweet of you." That was all. Not, "I cannot wait." Not, "Thank you." Just, "That is sweet of you." He agreed to go, but the enthusiasm was missing. During the trip, he spent most of the time on his phone, stepping outside to take calls, claiming they were urgent. At night, he went to bed early, saying he was not feeling well. I sat by the fireplace alone, listening to the wind move through the trees, wondering where I had gone wrong. I had hoped for warmth, for reconnection, for even one conversation that reminded us of what we had. Instead, I was met with silence. On the last night, I stood outside under the stars, tears slipping down my cheeks without warning. I felt like I was holding the pieces of something precious, something that was slowly crumbling no matter how tightly I clung to it. He came out briefly, wrapped his arms around me, but the embrace felt mechanical. There were no whispered words, no comfort, just cold hands and a long, quiet pause. I whispered, "I miss us," and he said nothing. That silence said everything. I had planned the entire trip hoping to feel close to him again, to prove that we were still worth fighting for. But he did not fight. He did not meet me halfway. He just let me try and try while he stood still, watching me unravel in my own efforts. As we drove home the next morning, I stared out the window, holding back tears. I had done something big. I had tried to save us. But he had already stopped reaching back. And I was beginning to realize that love, no matter how strong, could not survive in one direction. It did not happen with a loud, explosive argument like I imagined breakups usually did. It was quiet, almost eerily so. We had been sitting in the living room, the television murmuring in the background, both of us avoiding eye contact. The silence between us had become a third presence, a weight we no longer acknowledged but always carried. I asked him again if something was wrong. I asked him if we were still trying. He sighed deeply, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and said he did not know anymore. That was the beginning of the end. He did not raise his voice. He did not cry. He just sat there, emotionless, and said, "I think I need some space." My heart stopped. I asked him what that meant. He looked away and said he needed to figure himself out, that he felt lost, that he was not sure if he was ready for everything we had built. I asked him if there was someone else. He shook his head. I asked him if he still loved me. He did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, it was with a voice so quiet it barely reached me. "I care about you," he said. That was not the same. Within days, he packed a few of his things and left. No dramatic goodbye. No plan. Just a vague, unfinished sentence about needing time. I stood in the doorway as he walked down the hall with a duffel bag over his shoulder. He did not turn around. I waited until the door closed before falling to the floor. I could not breathe. I could not process how the man who once called me his forever could leave so calmly, so completely detached. I spent the first few days in a haze. I did not eat much. I barely slept. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message, a call, anything that would make this feel less permanent. But there was nothing. I told myself he just needed a few days, that he would come back once he had time to think. I replayed our last conversation over and over again, dissecting every word, every silence, searching for clues, for something I missed. Friends came by, bringing food, sitting with me, trying to remind me who I was before him. They told me it was not my fault. They told me I deserved better. I nodded, I thanked them, but their words passed through me like wind. My heart was not ready to accept that he was gone. I kept expecting the sound of his key in the door. I kept imagining his arms around me, telling me it was a mistake, that he loved me, that he was coming home. Instead, days turned into weeks. He did not reach out. I sent him a message once, asking if he was all right. He replied with a short, "I am okay. Hope you are too." Nothing more. No emotion, no follow-up. It felt like talking to a stranger. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him how he could do this, how he could promise me forever and then vanish like I never mattered. Worse than the silence was the half-presence he maintained. Every now and then, he would like a post on my social media or respond with a thumbs up to a message from a mutual friend. Just enough to remind me he still existed, not enough to show he cared. It felt cruel. It felt like he wanted to keep me hanging, unsure, waiting for something that would never come. One evening, I went out with a friend who insisted I needed fresh air. We stopped by a small cafe we used to love, a place filled with memories of laughter and shared desserts. I had not been there since he left. As I stepped through the door, I saw him. He was sitting at a corner table with a woman I had never seen before. She was laughing, leaning in close, her hand touching his. He was smiling, relaxed, more at ease than I had seen him in months. My breath caught in my throat. He saw me. Our eyes met for a second. He looked surprised, then uncomfortable. He nodded slightly, as if to acknowledge me, then turned back to her. That moment broke something in me. It was not just that he was with someone else. It was how natural it looked. How easily he had moved on while I was still putting myself back together piece by piece. She looked at him the way I used to, and he let her. I left without saying anything. My friend followed, her hand on my shoulder, her voice trying to soothe me. But I could not hear her. My heart was thudding too loudly in my ears. The pain hit in waves, betrayal, confusion, anger, sorrow. He had said he needed space. He had said he was lost. But there he was, laughing like nothing had happened, building a new story while mine was still crumbling. That night, I cried until my throat burned. I realized I had been holding on to hope that he would come back, that what we had still mattered to him. But seeing him with her shattered that illusion. It told me everything his silence could not. He had made a choice. He had chosen a life without me, and he had done so with ease. I was no longer confused. I was heartbroken, but no longer in denial. The man who promised forever had walked away without looking back. And now I had to learn how to live with the emptiness he left behind. At first, I told myself to let it go. I convinced myself that the details did not matter, that closure was not necessary, that I could begin to heal without understanding why he left. But healing does not always begin in the absence of truth. Sometimes it begins in the confrontation of it. I tried to move forward, but something kept pulling me back, an uneasiness that settled in my chest every time I thought about how quickly he had moved on. Something felt unfinished. Something did not make sense. It started with a conversation I did not expect. An old acquaintance reached out to me through a message. She had seen him recently, and not just with the woman I had seen at the cafe. She asked me gently if we were still together. I told her no, that he had left. She hesitated before telling me she had seen him with someone else even before we broke up. Not once, but several times. Her words opened a crack in the wall I had tried so hard to keep standing. My hands trembled as I scrolled back through our old messages, our photos, our memories. I had been so deeply invested in us that I ignored everything that did not align with the version of him I wanted to believe in. I started looking closer. I remembered the nights he said he had to work late, the weekends he said he needed time alone. I began to piece things together. There were subtle signs I had dismissed. The locked phone, the guarded tone whenever I asked too many questions, the sudden need for privacy when there had never been any before. One night, I found a comment on his social media from a woman whose name I had never heard. It was not overtly flirty, but there was a familiarity in her tone that unsettled me. I clicked through her profile and felt my stomach twist. There were pictures of them together, some older, some recent. In one, they were at a park we used to visit. In another, she wore a necklace I remembered seeing in our apartment. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. I stared at the screen, numb, as everything I had tried to protect myself from came crashing down. He had not just moved on. He had been preparing to leave long before he said the words. I was not part of his confusion. I was part of his transition. They had a history. She was someone from his past, someone he had never fully let go of. Maybe she had come back into his life. Maybe she had never really left. All I knew was that he had never been truthful. While I was sacrificing, holding on, believing in forever, he was slipping away piece by piece, giving parts of himself to someone else. It was not a clean break. It was a slow unraveling he had hidden behind tired excuses and vague promises. I decided I needed to speak to him, not to win him back, but to look him in the eyes and ask him why. I needed to hear the truth from him, even if it would hurt. I reached out. He agreed to meet. We sat across from each other at a quiet corner table, and for a moment, it felt like old times. But the air between us had changed. I asked him directly. I asked him if he had been seeing her while we were still together. He did not deny it. He did not even seem ashamed. He said it had been complicated. He said he had feelings he never dealt with, that he did not know how to tell me, that he did not want to hurt me. I told him he had done exactly that. He looked at me with tired eyes and said he had been unhappy for a while, that he thought I would be fine without him, that he did not want to fight anymore. His words landed like stones in my chest. He made it sound so simple, like walking away from a life we built was just another decision. I asked him if he ever meant the things he said to me. He shrugged, as if the answer did not matter. He said he had cared. He said he had tried. But sometimes, he said, things just fall apart. I sat there, watching the man I had loved speak about our relationship like it was some vague memory, like it was something that had happened to someone else. I realized then that he had already made peace with his choices, even if they had broken me. When I left that conversation, I did not cry. I did not scream. I walked out with my head held high because I finally saw the truth. He never intended to stay. He was always waiting for something else, for someone easier, safer, someone who did not require growth or honesty. He had chosen comfort over commitment, the past over the future we were building. And I had given everything to someone who only pretended to give back. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. It was not just about him choosing someone else. It was about the way he made me believe I was the only one, the way he accepted my sacrifices without revealing his doubts, the way he stood beside me while his heart was already somewhere else. I had offered him my vulnerability, my loyalty, my time, and he repaid it with dishonesty and cowardice. But as I walked home that evening, something inside me shifted. The truth, as painful as it was, set me free. I no longer had to wonder. I no longer had to hold on to a man who was never truly mine. I had been grieving a fantasy, not the reality. And now that I knew, I could finally begin to let go, not just of him, but of the hope that had kept me stuck. He could keep his comfort, his past, his easy choices. I was ready to choose myself. The healing did not happen overnight. It came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes crashing, but always relentless. I started by facing the silence. The silence that was once filled with his voice, his laughter, the promise of a future we were supposed to share. Now it was a void I had to learn to exist in. Therapy became a regular part of my life. I learned to untangle the mess inside my head, to confront the things I had ignored, the things I had convinced myself were not as important as they really were. I spoke about the relationship, about my pain, about the way he had made me feel like I was everything, only to make me feel like nothing in the end. I spent time with friends who reminded me of who I was outside of him. They saw the parts of me I had buried in the pursuit of loving him, in the pursuit of being everything he wanted. There were moments when I felt too tired to keep going, when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. But every time I reached out, someone was there. Whether it was a friend offering an ear, a family member offering comfort, or my therapist offering guidance. Slowly, the pieces began to fall back into place. I was learning how to breathe again, how to stand on my own feet. At first, even the good memories were tainted. I would find myself remembering the way he had held me, the way we had laughed, the way he made me feel special. But then the realization would come crashing in. All of those moments, all of those words, had been lies. He had never truly meant them. They had been performances, carefully crafted illusions that masked the truth. The realization stung. It made me question everything I had believed about us, about him, about myself. I had given so much of myself to a relationship that had been built on nothing more than promises and empty words. I had ignored the red flags, the subtle warnings, the parts of me that had known, deep down, that something was wrong. I had told myself that I was being paranoid, that I was overthinking things, that everything would be okay. And for a long time, I had believed that. But denial only lasts so long. Eventually, the truth breaks through, and you are forced to confront what you have been hiding from. I realized that I had spent so much time waiting for him to change, to be the man he promised he would be, that I had forgotten how to be the woman I once was. I had defined myself by him, by his love, by his attention, by his validation. But I was no longer that person. And that, perhaps, was the hardest thing to accept. I began to rebuild. I started small, with little victories. I found a new job that challenged me in ways I had never been challenged before. It was something I had wanted to do for years, but I had never taken the leap, always holding back because of him, because of our life together. Now, it felt like the right time to step into that new version of myself. I moved into a new apartment, one that was mine and mine alone. I decorated it with things that made me feel good, that reminded me of who I was before he came into my life. Each piece of furniture, each painting on the wall, was a small act of reclaiming my space, my identity. There were days when I missed him, when the loneliness felt too much, when the ache of what we had lost was too sharp. But those moments were becoming less frequent. I was learning that I did not need him to be whole. I was whole without him. I had always been whole. He had never defined me. I had given him that power, but it was mine to take back. I began to realize that I had been afraid of living without him. I had feared that I would lose myself in the process, that I would be nothing without him. But the truth was, I had been someone before him, and I would be someone after him. I had the power to create the life I wanted, the life I deserved. And little by little, I was doing just that. But healing is not linear. There were moments when I thought I had made peace, only to find myself drowning in a sea of memories. The smallest things would trigger a wave of emotion, seeing a couple holding hands, hearing a song we used to listen to, passing by a place we had once visited together. The memories would flood back, and I would feel like I was right back where I started. But then, I would remember. I would remember how far I had come, how much I had already rebuilt, and I would remind myself that I was stronger than I had ever known. And then came the day I realized I needed to do something final. Something that would close the door completely, something that would signify that I was truly moving on. I took the small box of mementos I had kept from our time together, photos, love letters, small trinkets, and I drove to the park where we had first met. It was the place where everything had started, and it was now the place where I would let it all go. I sat by the lake, the same lake we had sat by so many times, and I opened the box. I looked at each item one last time. I held the photos of us and remembered the good times, the ones I had convinced myself I could never forget. I read the love letters, the ones that had once felt so real, so sincere. And then, with a steady breath, I closed the box and threw it into the water. I watched as it sank beneath the surface, the memories slipping away, the past dissolving in the ripples. It was symbolic, but it was also necessary. It was my way of saying goodbye, my way of acknowledging that the man I had loved was no longer part of my story. And with that, I let go of the last remnants of him. As I walked away from the lake, I felt lighter, freer, as though a weight I had been carrying for far too long had been lifted. I was ready to begin the next chapter, ready to write my own story without him. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. It had been months since I had last thought about him. The pain that had once consumed me, the constant ache in my chest, had slowly faded away, leaving behind a scar that I no longer feared. The tears that had once fallen so easily, the ones I had cried in the darkness of my room, no longer came. There were moments, of course, when memories would resurface, the way he used to smile at me, the way his voice had sounded when he promised me forever. But instead of feeling like a dagger to my heart, they now felt like distant echoes of a life I had once lived, a life that no longer had a hold on me. I still carried the scar, the reminder of what I had given, what I had lost. But it no longer defined me. It did not dictate my happiness or my worth. It was a part of my past, but it was no longer my present. I had learned to live without him, to breathe without him, to find joy in the small things without needing his approval or his presence. I had found my own strength, a strength I had never known existed within me. And every day that strength grew. I was becoming the woman I had always been meant to be, the woman I had forgotten about in the shadow of our relationship. Then, one day, out of nowhere, he contacted me. It was a message, simple and unremarkable, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened between us. At first, I stared at the screen, the words feeling foreign to me. He spoke as if nothing had changed, as if time had not passed, as if I had not rebuilt my life without him. He apologized, spoke about missing me, about how he had made a mistake. There was guilt in his words, and a sense of nostalgia that seemed to bleed through every letter. It was clear he wanted to reconnect, to see if there was still something there. I sat with the message for a while, feeling nothing but a quiet sense of peace. I had expected to feel anger, to feel the urge to demand answers, to ask him why he had left me without a word. But there was nothing. The questions had already been answered, the wounds had already been healed, and I no longer needed closure from him. I had found my own. I took a deep breath and typed out my response. I did not accuse him, did not ask for anything. I simply said goodbye. It was calm, measured, and free from any bitterness. I thanked him for the memories, but I made it clear that I had moved on. I was no longer the woman who had once poured every ounce of her heart into him. I was no longer the woman who had thought that her worth depended on his love. I had become something stronger, something more resilient, and I had no room in my life for anything that was not aligned with that. When I sent the message, I felt a sense of finality, as though a chapter had truly ended. The past was now behind me, and I was free. The man who had once been my everything was no longer a part of my story. He had been my everything, but that was in the past. Now, I was my own everything. I had built a life that was mine, one that was not defined by him or by our relationship. I had become someone who could stand on her own, who could love herself without needing anyone else to validate her worth. As I went about my day, the weight of his message no longer lingered. There was no regret, no longing, no sense of loss. There was only the satisfaction of knowing that I had let go completely, that I had moved forward without hesitation or doubt. I had become the woman I had always been meant to be, strong, independent, and unafraid of the future. I had learned that my worth was never tied to anyone else's love or approval. It was always within me. And so, as I walked down the path that lay ahead of me, I felt a quiet sense of pride in how far I had come. I was no longer the woman who had cried for him, the woman who had begged for his love. I was the woman who had learned to love herself, who had learned to find strength in the face of heartbreak, and who had learned that her happiness was hers to create. I was my own everything now, and that was more than enough.